Russia's large-scale mobilization on the Ukrainian border. Certainly, if you're a historian, knows that this has some grim historic precedent. But there's always that looming shadow of having things go all nuclear. And if the Kremlin decided to pull the trigger, it would encounter a hazard that no invading army has ever faced before. That is, we have 15 nuclear power reactors, which generate roughly 50% of Ukraine's energy needs at 4 sites. So these reactors are the danger. And we found out last night just how dangerous it can become when we were told that one of the largest reactors or one of the largest nuclear power plants in Europe was being shelled by Russian armies, by Russian groups. But I think, though, that everything that we were hearing was overplayed because, once again, it goes back to how the media is handling this. We don't get both sides of the story. We don't hear about the histories. We don't hear about what may or may not be going on and what motives are for Russia doing something as counterintuitive as trying to blow up a nuclear site that, if radiation was to spew out, it would kill more Russians than Ukrainians. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, okay, like I said, we're looking at radiation. Radiation has no borders, so a lot of people would die. A lot of people would die. If struck, the installations could become radioactive landmines, radiological mines. Russia would be a victim of the ensuing wind-borne radioactive debris, given the vulnerability of Ukraine's nuclear reactors and the human environmental devastation that would follow. If we were to hear of other plants or nuclear reactors being damaged, then Russian President Vladimir Putin would have an even worse scenario on his hands. The world would have a worse scenario on their hands. That is why I think the media, being as ineffective as they are, basically, as I said, sum it up with, well, Vladimir Putin's bad, poor Ukraine. That's basically what we get every night on the news. Vladimir Putin's bad, poor Ukraine. When you have reactors and you have nuclear power plants, they contain enormous amounts of radioactive material, which can be released in any number of ways. Aerial bombing, artillery fire, for example, could break a reactor's containment building or sever vital coolant lines. You can attack the diesel that keeps the coolant going. There are a lot of things, a lot of off-site power sources that keep these plants running. So if a reactor core was to melt, there would be explosive gases to deal with. The radioactive debris could exit the containment structure. And once in the atmosphere, all of the contaminants would settle over thousands of miles, dumping light to very toxic radioactive elements on urban and rural areas. And a lot of spent nuclear fuel could cause further devastation if storage pools were actually burning and set aflame. But last night's report, I think, was used for effect. And also, given Chernobyl's legacy, one might think that Russia would shun attacks on operating reactors. So again, we ask, why did Russia do this? Because your allies, Russia, are going to get the brunt of the radiation and not your enemies. So it's counterintuitive. And as I say, is this a hole in the script that we're not looking at? Yeah, it is horrible that we are seeing a nuclear Russian roulette happening here. The specter of the Cold War has returned, and now we find that Russia has decided to invite the spirit back into our realm with an attempted unconventional nuclear strike. Hitting a nuclear site would be interesting because it would be a nuclear attack without the image of a mushroom cloud in most respects. Radiation would not be seen, but it would be felt, if not immediately, but perhaps 20 years later, as various cancers would start showing up in those areas that are downwind from the attacks. The possibility of the radiation being released from the reactors would be far worse than an atomic bomb blast. This would be at ground level, where a nuclear bomb releases its radiation to the atmosphere. Basically, what it sucks up ground around it, and the fallout is what comes down and is radiated. But an attack on a power plant would release radiation without a flash, supposedly, which is unreal because we're used to the whole Cold War image of a nuclear mushroom cloud where you're told to duck and cover. But the radiation would not disperse. It would just radiate at ground zero It's like we would have the same consequences that plagued Fukushima. And overall, it can be said that we're caught in this self-sustaining, self-reinforcing feedback loop. Call it the death spiral, or it's the death spiral of human annihilation, a maelstrom of nuclear waste and fallout and death. So counterintuitive moves by Russia, I believe, are worthy of analysis, especially when it will harm Russia and the media doesn't want to report this for some reason. Those now in power are never going to backtrack on this suicidal course. It's what defines them. It drives them. It's as much a part of them as their hearts and brains and everything in the void where their souls would be if they weren't morally bankrupt, sociopathic mutants. This is where we are now. This is where it stands now. And I'm just curious as to how far this is going to go, how the hand is going to be played. Wars magnify the risks of these nuclear reactors, getting in the crosshairs. Given Chernobyl, given all the other, like 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, and of course, like I said, Fukushima, the anniversary is coming up. But, there are cases all the time, such as what happened last night, of dumb luck where, nothing bad happened, thank God. But they still make it sound like that it was over the top, that we narrowly died. And no, it was just a training facility that was hit and caught on fire. It wasn't any reactors. There's there's a lot of protection. But of course, if those protections become vulnerable, then, we're looking at a bridge too far here, in my opinion. Russian combat behavior does not fit with the aftermath of what this would mean. When you look at the Kremlin, the lesson ought to be clear. We are seeing a risk of radiological disasters that will affect not only Ukraine, but Russia. And so I don't think this merits a gamble here. But we're going to talk more about this, and we're going to have a special guest on the program. LIBBE HALEVY is going to be on the program. LIBBE HALEVY is going to be on the program tonight to talk about this nuclear hot seat. We'll be back with more Keep It here on Ground Zero.